so that we lost our throne in 1261. But it was only a matter of time before the price was paid for such an atrocity. In 1453, the empire was conquered by the Ottomans and vanished. You must surely know that. God imposes his retribution on the evildoer and his works. So the Christian empire fell because of that original crime against my family. 700 years later, our child was still alive in that house in Sydney. So were our throne, our empire, our family, as if nothing had happened in between, and there was a direct line of communication with the fatal events of the 13th century. I was puzzled, amused, somehow inspired to go back and study the period. When I told him so, he replied with contempt in his voice, "You didn't know any of this? What are they teaching you at school nowadays?" So you can see why I fell in love with that boy. Now, Vrasida, let's begin with you telling us how your association with Mr Manoly Lascaris developed.
Well, first of all, I wanted to meet him because I was translating Voss. And whoever reads the book understands that, and that was a common pattern for all the people who approached Manoly Lascaris, is that they wanted to do that because of Patrick White. Yeah. And he was not simply invisible, not simply insignificant, but just a step towards a great man. And I think he made me understand that from the beginning. I said, do you want to know more about Patrick White? Do you want to know more about this? And then I was feeling that he was misleading me. He was telling me all these lies, all these improbable and completely, if I may say, outrageous stories about him. About Patrick White, which could not be true, as you know. So one day I realized, I said, no, I'm not here for him. I am here for Patrick White. Right. So it was a revelation to me as well that, when you try to use someone, an individual, to go to reach another end, it was, as my students would have said, wrong, profoundly wrong. So I decided to ask him about him. And as he said, complaining about Patrick White's biographer, he said that he never asked me, "Who are you, Mr. Lascaris?" Yes. This is David Mark. Yes. "Who are you, Mr. Lascaris?" And actually one day I had this enlightenment, an illumination, and I asked him, "Ποιος είστε, κύριε Laskari?"
Because of course he was speaking in Greek with
In Greek. Yes. And then he told me that story you read, and I still remember this incredible expression in Greek, "Ακόμη ενθυμούμε ονόματα απολεσθέντων Ελλήνων." Which is one of the most amazing expressions, because essentially, ακόμη ενθυμούμε ονόματα απολεσθέντων Ελλήνων, because he was listening to them there was the Red Cross. If you remember, for some of you who lived after the war, remember them in Greece in the late 70s, the Red Cross every Monday at 9 o'clock had all these Greeks missing during the Second World War, then during the Civil War, and his family looking for that person. So Manoly Lascaris was listening to these names, obviously, through the high frequencies here in Australia. And he actually started telling me names of these people. And I think it was really a revelation to me that suddenly you have now a human being with a very, if I may say, in this case, invisible inner life, and I have to unveil it. And ever since, after the second chapter, and after our third meeting, I never asked him anything about Patrick White. I didn't even want to know anything about Patrick White. Of course, he was a shadow there.
Is that when you decided to start recording
conversations? Yes, because first of all, I liked his language. His language, as you mentioned, it was Oriental Greek. It was ecclesiastical Greek. It was the Roman, the Romaica, as he called it. That was a Romaica, as he said, which is the language of the Greeks of Constantinople, Smyrna, and Alexandria, which, for those of you who have studied Greek history, essentially Alexandria, Smyrna, Constantinople, and Odessa were until 1922 the spiritual capital cities of Hellenism. Athens became the capital city of the spiritual capital, intellectual capital city after the 30s. Until then, Constantinople to this day. Istanbul, not Constantinople. But as the patriarch had said, Allah, as Manoli always used to say, Allah, sort of that's which I'm trying to. Allah. We never call it Constantinople or Istanbul. We call it the polis.
Yes.
There is only one city, and that's the polis. We call it a polis, and I am from the polis. And actually, don't forget that the name Istanbul means polis. It's a Greek name. Istanbul. So it is the polis, which belongs to all cultures, all people, all civilizations, according to him. But as you said, and you read that, he had this very, very strong sense of continuity with Byzantium. And Byzantium for him, the Lascaris, because, Lascaris were probably the most glorious emperors of Byzantium because they restored education, the empire, the prestige, the dignity of a fallen empire in 1204. It was something completely different in him, as you understand. It was a sort of personally, I don't call it Mediterranean Greek, but Oriental Greek, but Mediterranean Greek. It was the sea, the open sea, the oceanic feeling that you have when you're watching the Mediterranean blue. And
to which he refers quite often in the talks.
He kept talking about that Mediterranean blue, to galanon, as he used to say. And he used this very interesting ecclesiastical, quasi-ecclesiastical, and some sort of a kind of ancient expressions, which was Byzantium, of course. And sometimes, as he said, and this is the Cavafy element, I like reverting to the vernacular. And he used some incredibly vulgar expressions, just back then I was more prudish and much more sort of a kind, if I may say, just a person moralistic. And so I couldn't believe that such a word came out of his voice. But as he told me, nothing about Cavafy, he said, because Cavafy used to go, he said that Manoli used to tell me, Mr Lascaris used to tell me that, going around the cafes, the Café Santan, as he said, of Alexandria, listening ta ελληνικά στη Vrasidas, as they were boiling, just the Vrasidas, which was very interesting in that respect.
I love one of the stories he tells you about Cavafy being one of the fallen middle classes from Izmir, Smyrna, excuse me, and going about he'd never wash, and he'd use a great deal of perfume to keep the smell away. I love that story. Now, Vrasidas, I'd love to know how, at what point did you decide to record the conversations, and how did you go about doing this? Because I don't imagine he would have allowed you to turn up with a recorder of any sort. No. So what was the process of recording?
He used to say, how proletarian. Yes. He used to say, how proletarian. You cannot concentrate. You must be obviously from an industrial city.
He's always berating you, isn't he?
Yeah, you must be obviously from an industrial city. I told him that I grew up in Piraeus. I said, well, I said, yes, well, in the beginning, I wanted to record the sessions. He never allowed that, so I had to write down what he was saying. And actually, he became more and more demanding to see what I was writing down. He said, what are you writing? You are doomed to misunderstand me, as he said at a certain stage. But what I wanted to maintain, and I don't know if that comes across in the book itself, is the flavor of his specific idiom.
Oh, absolutely, yes. That's what drew me to the book.
Yeah, because such idiomatic, and for us, Athenians, from Piraeus, Athenian, well, an industrial place, that incredible language, right, which is a language of, if I may say, of disequilibriums, totally anachronistic, totally ungrammatical in most occasions, who grew up with this flat Athenian expressionless, journalistic prose, it was a revelation, because you read about these things, you read Cavafy, you read older texts, but when you hear somebody using it, this is the real revelation, because language becomes a bodily expression, how he used to say that. I'll never forget this incredible expression from classical Greek that he used to use, whereas was looking into the fridge for some fruit to give me. And actually his voice was coming from within the fridge. And I said, excuse me, what was that? And he said that incredible expression, a good friendship is based, a permanent friendship is based on a good dictionary.
He often comes across like an oracle, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He makes these pronouncements and ejaculations that emerge, and between berating you, he sounds like a mystic prophet. And I have to admit, I was often very baffled by what he was saying. I thought, I don't understand a word of what he's just said. And I'd read over and over again, and there was an oracle quality about his pronouncements, isn't there?
Well, now I think that, I don't know if he was a mystic or something like that. I never took him as a mystic. He was too of a sensualist, too much of a sensualist to be. But mystics are all sensualists anyway. But I think that there was an explosion of expression, of language, of meaning that was coming out of him, because he had never talked about himself. And it's very interesting to see someone who wants to declare that I exist, and I am here, I have been here. And afterwards, as you understand, I was younger back then and much more sort of a narcissistic. I understood that you have to completely efface yourself. Now you have a miracle of nature in front of you, not to say a historical improbability. And you have to talk about an individual who must give a testimony of his existence, or who struggles to give a testimony about his existence. Then I forgot who I was, and I was simply asking him.
He's very reluctant to reveal personal details about himself and Patrick White. However, I get the impression that I think he saw his opportunity in you to come out of the shadow of Patrick White, and therefore the reluctance is often sort of overcome by, as you say, a kind of overspill of language and information and ideas and so on. Do you think he was using you to come out of that invisibility?
I think so, that because after a while he understood that, I'm going to say, I mean, we had a complete individual in front of you.
Yeah.
And an individual that nobody has ever actually shown any interest in. And there I was, a newly arrived Greek, very enthusiastic about everything. And I started asking him questions about his family and his mother, who abandoned them when he was only 7, about his father, who was this voluptuous beast, as he used to call him, and his mother, who was a Catholic and married him, but then she discovered that Catholic Church didn't recognize marriages between different denominations, so she abandoned the children and went to the United States, and they grew up with his with the sister, their father's sisters, and one of them I met in Athens, and it was very interesting woman. She died a few years ago, and what I saw there, what I was trying to say, what I detected in him is an attempt to reconstruct his past.
That's right.
To give us a sort of an idea of where he began. He had all these beautiful memories, majestic memories about Izmir and Smyrna and Constantinople, and then these incredible memories from Alexandria. And as you see, as you remember, he had a lot of bad memories from Athens, because he stayed in Athens for 4 years after the Asia Minor catastrophe. And as he insisted, I was a child, as he said, not of my parents, but of Asia Minor catastrophe. For him, 1922, and I believe that he showed me the trauma that is lingering in the modern Greek conscience to this day about the catastrophe of 1922. Most communists believe that it was a civil war, but in reality It was the Asia Minor catastrophe because it was the dislocation, the displacement, the uprooting of so many people after 4,000 years of living in the place. You know that very well, eh?
Well, I realised at one point part of the reason why I was so obsessed with the book, quite aside from this man's voice, was actually that I was relating to it as a child of that catastrophe, even though, of course, I wasn't born in 23, I was born in 61. But growing up in Asia Minor at that period was very much a part of that historical disaster that sort of uprooted and created an identity schism. And I think that's what you really pick up in his monologues and dialogues with you, is how torn he is between place, but also within himself as well.
Well, because for him it was a lingering trauma. It was there forever. And as he said, we lost everything. We lost our capital. For an emperor, once an emperor, always an emperor. And, you know, since they were emperors of Byzantium, Byzantium belonged to them. And then Smyrna, they lost this incredible mansion, as he said, in Smyrna. And if you remember, in 1972, an Australian friend went to Smyrna and sent a letter to Patrick White and Manoli from the land of Izmir, you know, something like that. And they became furious, both of them, because it was an insult to Manoli's history, as Patrick White said. And the name of the place is not Izmir, it's Smyrna, you know, in a letter by Patrick White. And so I think that was the history of all those Greeks was in him. He felt responsible for them. Hence the concept of our child.
Our child.
For me, it was the most interesting, the most surprise. Το παιδί μας, το τέκνον μας, as he used to say. I said, do you have a child? Who is this? Who is this Technon? I said, oh, you know, that happened on 13th of December, 1259. 1259. I said, you know, that was a bit, you know, it's an old history. And then he started to say, wow, you know, just, you know, nothing. Meanwhile, I had written a whole book on that. I had written a whole book on Byzantine history, but you never asked me what I did. Actually,
no, you get that impression, don't you, that he talked at you, but he never ever asked what you thought about anything.
Well,
and
once
when you offered your opinion, he was very dismissive. Nothing.
I remember once I dared to tell him that I was promoted. I said, Mr. Lascaris, yesterday I received my first promotion from lecturer to senior lecturer. He turned around in contempt, utter contempt. He said, some institutions are victims to their own regulations. which I found really funny, very interesting, you know, just which was very, you know, just, I think that it was a very interesting statement of how he wanted me to be there. And he wanted to talk to someone about, you know, about himself. And as he said, I do that in Greek because he never spoke to me in English, with the exception of very few. And it was very interesting to see that after 50 years in Australia and speaking predominantly English, the competence, his expressive, the expressive ability of his Greek, and the semantics of his language being so rich and so diverse, and making references to Sappho, since we heard this morning, reference to Plato. You didn't know the word anivisis, you know. No, I said anivisis. Anivisis means to become an adolescent again. Evie, F-E-V, Evie, anivisis. You didn't know the word anivisis. I said, no. I sort of, no. And, you know, just, and he said, then he said the dictionary is absolutely impossible. So I used to write, I have another notebook with words that he told me in Greek that, you know, I was trying to find out what did he mean with this? You know, just, I had to go to a dictionary, of course, to find them. And then he used to correct me. Sappho used to say, never says eros glycithimos, with a sweet-hearted eros. She says, and that you can find said in the critical edition of so and so, eros glycipikros, bittersweet eros, which he was right and I was wrong. And and he actually had this incredible memory as well. Plus, something else you must have noticed is his dreams.
Dreams, yes.
He dreams. And I was fascinated by these incredible dreams that he was telling me, which I thought, he used to call me on the phone and said, now, write down this dream. And I found it extremely beautiful what he did. He showed me trust, and I started appreciating more and more.
That's right. That's what I got the impression, especially when you started recording those dreams. I thought, oh, okay, this man is beginning to trust you now. So, and one of the sweet things, I suppose, about the book for me was how this relationship developed. And I think at one point you said you'd spent a great deal of time looking for a father figure, and there he was all along.
Yeah, of course.
So it's a very beautiful relationship that sort of develops. And I think for me, part of the charm of the book is that it moves from a very antagonistic sort of position, like a warring thing, and very, very slowly it sort of emerge, and the voices even merge, and the feelings.
Yeah. He became my Socrates at the end.
The very Socratic dialogue, that's correct.
And actually, the whole book itself is based on a form of Platonic dialogue. Because it's so interesting, I was thinking, how could I write the biography of this man? How can I say something? And I think that his life was uneventful, as he used to use. Yes, except the dreams. He had an inner life, but not outside life. He used to, I remember he used a beautiful aristocratic word in Greek. Η ζωή μου ήταν αθόρυβος. Noiseless.
Translate noiseless.
Noiseless. I led a noiseless life, which I found beautiful and word, so dignified. And he said, how can you talk about a noiseless life? So I decided that the best way of doing that is by creating a sort of a form of dialogues.
So you were never tempted to go the conventional biography way at all?
I thought that in the beginning, and then the first part was an attempt to do it in a form of he was born there and in that time, but it didn't work. It gave the idea of a sort of a kind of not simply a noiseless life, but a life without, parameters, without horizons. And I think that what I did in the end, because in the end our meetings were dialogues, situational dialogues almost. He was teaching me how to be myself, as he used to say, by showing what he was and who he was. Right. And I found it really profound and very Socratic in that respect, because he became didactic, and as he said, I became didactic in order to show you, and I love that one, the magic of the imperative. In my years prostactikis, as he used to tell me, the magic of the imperative. And he used to express himself in a sense of, sort of, as you said, an oracular. In the end, he became really a sort of a religious thinker. What is the meaning of God? It's a question, he used to say. And what's the question? The fundamental question, are you there? And I found it really bizarre coming out, just at the moment, that the answer to the question of God is another question. Are you there? Which you have to answer for yourself. At the same time, he was saying these incredible things, which for me were bang, just revelations. He was offering me Greek chocolate and said, now this is the Eon, as you say. You have to Eon chocolate. You must have this chocolate, as he said. And I found this incredible combination of the abstract with the sensory, with the mundane, and the conceptual, completely conceptual, extremely intriguing.
And that wouldn't have worked really, would it, if you'd gone the conventional biography way? And I think part of the attraction for me when I read your book was Motherland came out the same year. And like you, I decided not to go the conventional memoir way. I fused fiction with memoir and memoir with fiction. So I created a kind of melange, which actually in some ways actually worked against the book. And I was wondering, did you suffer because of this book? I mean, how was it received critically when it came out? And were you ever tempted to sort of go outside of the dialogues?
No. I think the book was received very well critically.
Was it?
Very well. there's a number, at least 15 reviews that appeared.
Fabulous.
And in the Sydney Morning Herald was the pick of the week, as they said, and then became the pick of the month, which is very, very interesting in that respect. And and when we did the launch of the book, there were hundreds of people there. I would never expect that to be there because nobody ever paid any attention to Mr. Lascaris himself. I think I was very satisfied because I think that was very good to see that, as we said, an invisible individual suddenly gains acceptance, and in that respect, I try to efface myself, although I am always there because I am the person next to him. I believe that I just wanted to foreground his personality. So look at this unique individual, the uniqueness of this presence, which I believe it is more part of the intellectual biography instead of a sort of biography of the historical particulars.
Yes. Now, at one point he says, "Thank God that I can say all these things in Greek because I feel that whatever I say in English hides half my face." Really interesting.
That's an amazing expression. He said, "Hides my face, half of my face." I can't show how very amazing expression.
And when I read that, I completely understood what he was saying as a Greek Turk and as an Australian. And I thought, you yourself, you've hardly lived in Greece, really. You've lived here for 20 years now. Yeah. Did you relate to that? I mean, and what do you think that says about the Greek diaspora?
Well, I know that we have identity problems and naming questions here, but I don't think that Mr. Lascaris ever had any identity problems. Mr. Manoly Lascaris was Mr. Manoly Lascaris. And take it or leave it. He was Greek, and he was proud. He was Byzantine, and he was proud. He was diachronic, and he was proud, and take it or leave it. And he never had any internal divisions about who he was. I think that if I may say, our motherland, that's something that helped me realize, is the people we love. And our spiritual family that we choose. And I think that for him that was a very important thing, that we choose our emotional motherland by relating to other people around us, irrespective of their cultural or social origin. And I think that Mr. Lascaris had that extremely interesting way of expressing his identity as a unique individual. And I don't know if I actually grasped that uniqueness of his individuality.
No, I think you did, and I think this is what stood out for me. I actually seeing him as a displaced Greek in Australia, and he was a complete unit that had calcified in a way in that house in Centennial Park. He was locked in amber, and all the dialogues and the abstract thought and so on seemed to have been locked in at a point when he came to Australia.
He was not really locked in. He didn't live in a cocoon. He was very open to many things. He disliked the Greeks here in Australia.
He disliked the Greeks.
He disliked the Greeks in Australia.
Did he say why?
Well, you know how prejudiced they are, as he said.
Oh, that's right. Yes, he says that.
About his sexuality. Yes. You know how prejudiced they are. And so, of course, but at the same time, he had I think that his experiences with, I shouldn't be saying that, with Greeks of that specific area of Sydney, the very wealthy, ostentatious, extremely exhibitionistic, if I may say, just very sort of a kind of up themselves Greeks, he thought of them as extremely sort of a kind of low class, as he used to say, very low class people, as he said, who have become very wealthy. And I have to admit, I didn't write this book because some of his neighbors were my friends, and they used to come on the other side, the backside of the pergola, as he used to say, to give us food when we were talking. And they had Manoli, Mr. Lascaris, wow, going into tantrums. You don't know this and you don't know that. Get this galactombureka, Mr. Lascaris, But it means, I think that he had a deep prejudice against, or deep prejudice, fear or phobia against that kind of sort of a Greek mentality.
Do you think he was displaced in Australia? I got the impression that he never really got used to he actually says at one point the light in Australia, and I got the impression he never really got used to living here. Is that correct, or?
Well, he had what he wanted, and that was Patrick White.
Which
was Patrick White. And I think that he had next to him a thriving community of intellectuals, artists, thinking people who sort of loved the atmosphere around Sydney, especially when they moved to Sydney. Of course, as he used to say, when he came to Australia, he was horrified. They didn't know what the olive oil.
That's right.
And I'm talking, of course, as he said, δια το ελαιόλαδον.
Didn't have to go to a chemist or something?
And he didn't know what that was. They didn't know what that was.
And he had to go to a chemist
He
to buy
had to go to a
olive
chemist to get eleoladon, as he used to say. But I think that he loved the place because of Patrick White and some of his other friends here. And then
but I know that a lot of those friends, because I know some of those people, thought he was a servant. In fact, I won't say who said it, but she actually said, we thought he was just a servant in the house.
Yeah, don't forget that the media had presented him as the Greek butler, and I think that some criticism, if I may say, the only way that I retaliated to some criticism by David Ma is that, of course, they never expect that wogs to be intellectuals. Sort of a kind, and I think that level of intellectuality, which I found it extremely challenging for me as well, let alone for people around them back then. And I think that people find it hard to believe that Mr. Lascaris was a thinking individual, and that before publishing his books, Patrick White gave them to him to give him the final okay. And that Patrick White always respected his opinion. He actually told me that Patrick White thought that his book, Eye of the Storm, was the best. Takes 700 pages to kill your mother, as he said. And or The Vivisector was the most profound analysis of artistic psychology, which is absolutely true. And I think Mr. Lascaris was this kind of person, but he didn't want to promote himself. And when they had all these meetings with other intellectuals, he was always hiding in the background. And he never talked to them in the way that they would like to talk, him to have spoken. Probably it was his mistake as well. But I think that he didn't want to detract attention from Patrick White as the writer himself.
You've translated two of Patrick White's books, as we say. Do you think Manoly's influenced Patrick White's thinking?
Profoundly. If you read Voss, Voss dies in the middle of Australia, and he says, Patrick White has that incredible line, which I've never forgotten. Voss will die here, he says, and his memory will be in this land forever, in exactly the same way, pay attention, that Hagia Sophia will remain a Christian church 500 years after the Muslim defilement. That comes out of the blue, just bang, that was Manoli, that was not, after, in exactly the same way that Hagia Sophia will remain a Christian church 500 years after Muslim defilement. Whoa, where did that come from, as you see, and of course the Greek characters in his book, his last books were always about Greece, and he has written this incredible short essay, if you remember, Greece, My Second Country, which strongly recommend you to read it, because you understand how he related to Greece, and what sort of Patrick White was the only Phil-Hellenic writer who never saw Greece under the light of classicism. For him, Greece was the Greece of Byzantium and the Turkish occupation, of the Turkokratia, as he used to say. Because there, he said, you developed, in this very interesting article that he had written, developed the most important element of your national mentality, if I remember well, psyche, he says, which is the spirit of resistance. And he actually says, let's hope that the untried Australia will follow your path. He called Australia the untried Australia. And I think that Patrick White made a very important, in that case, if I may say, just a diagnosis about Greek culture, that the spirit of resistance is probably the most permeating characteristic of the 700 years of history, of the last 700
Let's
years.
hope the Aborigines pick it up in Australia as well.
Yes.
We're running out of time.
We must wrap it up.
But before I throw it to the audience for questions, I'd like to ask you one final thing. What do you think Manoly Lascaris would have made of the publication of Patrick White's The Hanging Garden, which is the unfinished, unedited manuscript that was published recently? What do you think he would have had to say about something like that? Because when I was reading this novel, I kept hearing his voice.
Did you like it?
I hated it. Yeah. I stopped reading after 3 pages. I thought it was a loathsome exercise, actually. But it's not for me to say it. But I'd love to hear what you think.
Well, I think he wouldn't have liked it at all.
No.
And the book is sketchy at best, and Patrick White is dying, and of course he has some sublime lines and apophthegms.
Absolutely.
But I don't think that comes. Patrick White is a great plot maker.
And stylist. But I think that the style comes out of the plot there. I will never forget what Patrick Manoli told me, that the real protagonist of his movies is the Sydney weather. That's true.
In Voss, he says the real characters are not the characters, but the clothes they're wearing. And if you read Voss, you will see that Patrick White always describes how clothes were rubbing against each other, how they stuck in a chair, how they went there, and Manoli point out these incredible details, which makes the style.
One of the things that always stood out for me when I was reading The Tree of Man is the way Patrick White says, and he stood up inside his grey trousers. And I thought, I've never heard anyone say such a thing. But he repeats similar phrases throughout the book.
Verbal. That's why A.D. Hope called him a verbal and illiterate sludge. His prose, especially that prose there, just think. But he had these green thoughts growing up in a yellow mind. I love this incredible expression. When I translated that book into Greek, my editor said, you must have lost it completely. Yes. What is this green thoughts growing up out of a yellow mind? And of course it was amazing, just synesthetic, just the expression of how sort of a kind fresh thoughts come out of something that has withered out and become so sort of a kind dominant. I think he wouldn't have liked it.
Yes, I suspect that both of them are sitting on the other side waiting for David Mind, Barbara Mobbs, just waiting to get
And they made a lot of mistakes in the transcription of Greek, if I may say, and Angelo Loukakis, who helped them, to do it, I mean, they should have noticed and paid more attention to what is said there, because there are a lot of Greek expressions, most of them are wrong.
I would not have picked up because my Greek is appalling.
Well, I'm beyond that one. I'm a philologist as well, and I'm nitpicking there, which is professional vice.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions for Mr. Vrasidas Karalis, please ask.
Or for Dmitri, if you want.
No, not
because yes, Dimitri's, if I may say, Dimitri's book is a spiritual pilgrimage to the Estias, the birthplace of Greekness, of Byzantium, the Byzantine tradition, and I really enjoyed it because it's so emotionally written, and at the same time so objectively written, and at the same time in an attempt to define yourself, to determine origins, roots, sort of a kind, if I may say, in the beginning was the words that gave birth to you, which I find it magnificent and strongly recommend to read his book.
Thank you very much. Ma'am, your question?
In your opening statement, you said this book is waiting to be translated in Greek. And I'll put it to Vrasidas. You're the person to translate.
I know.
The original, as you said, Lascaris had his own sort of version of Greek, personified that part of Greek history that retained the language, the Greek language.
Mr. Manoly, you're very enthusiastic, and I love your, admire your enthusiasm. But the Greeks of Greece, the Helladists, are not interested in our adventure. And if I may be cruel and ruthless to admit that, they are so introspective and so introverted that the spiritual and, if I may say, the historical adventure of the Greek diaspora, which have saved Hellenism in so many occasions, bears no relevance to their life. They're not interested at all. And you must know it, since you are Greeks of the diaspora. Unfortunately, as you know, there are two kinds of Hellenes, the Helladists and the Hellenists, us. We represent Hellenism, not Helladism. And I think that you must realize that, they're not in the least interested. Although, I must admit, when the book came out, people who read English wrote extensive reviews in Kathimerini, in great in very popular newspapers in Greece. But the book itself, as you see, gives something. I want to be a window to the non-Greeks about the Greek adventure. I mean, we can talk about us here, and we can express our adventure to each one of us, but we have to, open up and look outwards and look what happens to the others. If I may say, when you read James Joyce, you read English, but it's Irish. So, if I may say, in this book, I try to transfuse Greek emotions into English words. I don't know if it's successful, and to the extent that it became successful. So it will be translated eventually, like your book.
I discovered that, when Motherland was published, and I was greatly surprised that the Turks published it first. It's a pretty brutal book, especially about the Turks. They published it first. No Greek publisher, and numerous Greek publishers have seen it now, has shown a vaguest interest in the book. So that says a lot.
Since you mentioned that, I published this book on Greek cinema. I'll finish with that. And the book is will be translated to Turkish 3 months after it came out, because, but not in Greek. Yeah.
No, yes.
No, I think that it was, he gave me this idea. Because the Byzantines, despite of what we think, right, had a very important characteristic which determined their survival for 1,200 years. It's the longest surviving, it had been the longest surviving empire in the history of the Western world. And that was their open cosmopolitanism. I call it Hellenic cosmopolitanism, a Hellenic idea which is open to the other world, absorbs ideas, rituals, practices, expressions, ways of living from the other world without feeling, in a sense, either schizophrenic or inferior. I mean, the Byzantines never had the problem of that modern Greeks have, of comparing themselves disadvantageously to the other people. We have this obsession, manic obsession, of comparing ourselves in a negative way constantly. The Byzantines accepted that and that. That was the openness of the Greek character always. Intellectual position, historical reality, they were forced by events. You have to accept, that the other is another, and the other is different to you. Today, we have to we relate, as you understand, this idea, I think, that you see in Manoly Lascaris, is that which are called the Byzantine spirit, the Byzantine cosmopolitanism, is that Istanbul, Constantinople, in the 10th century, was the first city with a mosque. And we don't have a mosque today in Athens. And because despite the fact that they had constant enemies with the Muslims. One day before the fall of Constantinople to the abominable, infidels, as Manoli would have said, Mr. Lascaris, Mohammed went to Constantinople to pray in the mosque that they had. And the doors were open on the state of war and siege. So I think what impressed me with the Byzantine spirit is that open and, if I may say, the Greeks have a great word for this, philoxenopneuma, the hospitable approach to the other. Come in and not stay out. And I think that Mr. Lascaris had that incredible spirit of philoxenia, of hospitality in the original means of the word, that everybody who was coming towards him was a friend and not an enemy. And he never defined himself vis-à-vis an enemy, but always on friendly terms with the other, which showed, as you understand, the very unified and extremely solid personality that he had. Yeah.
Can we say that the anti-Latinism that prevailed in Constantinople after 1201 or 1206 blinded the Byzantines and obliged them to look for alliances with the Ottomans, so to say?
Now that's a historical question about Byzantium, of course. Should I answer it? I will discuss about that afterwards, just because it was a trauma, of course. It had to be... No, yes. Yes.
Lascaris and Patrick White used to frequent the Roman Catholic Church almost every Sunday morning. Did you ask him about that?
In a Protestant church as well. And don't forget that until 1960, the Greeks were advised by the Patriarchate of Constantinople that were able to have intercommunion with the Anglicans. It was a decision taken by the Patriarch in 1920. So until the establishment of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, so they could take the Holy Communion from Anglican churches. So, but that shows, as you said, they were going to Orthodox churches. They loved the rituals, and the incense and the censer and these kind of things. And but I think for them, if I may say, religion was a ritual. A ritual.
Would you consider Patrick White a religious man?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I think he's one of the most religious writers of the 20th century. And he was trying, because of his, just extremely, if I may say, atheistic sort of a kind upbringing, and to establish a new religion, as he said, of mystics. That's why he loved all mystical theologies and these kind of things. But of course, highly religious writer, and in the vivisector, you have the idea: who is the vivisector? Who cuts alive human beings, who dissects human beings who are still alive? God, as he said. And he starts with this incredible game: a dog that becomes a god that becomes a god, and this incredible indigo blue, he says, of the Byzantine transfigurations. And if you remember, in the 12th century, Byzantium was the first cultural entity that introduced indigo blue, the color from India, the blue of India, in order to refer to the transfigured reality of human beings. So whenever you hear all these colors in Patrick White, you understand that there is a theological and spiritual meaning.
And it came from Mr. Lascaris.
But yeah, exactly. But it was not. They were not doctrinaire. They're not going to say I'm this or that. They were, all right. That's it.
We have run out of time, so please put your hands together for Mr. Manoly.
Thank you.